Okay, welcome to Inspired by Skeptical, the Sinkhole remix. Okay, this one was requested by quite a few people, and so today we're going to step through a few different areas of this recreation. First up, I'm going to play my recreation of the tune, and then we're going to go through all of the components that I used to do that. And so we're going to go through the drums, the atmospheres, and the bass. So probably most of you are going to be most interested in the bass. The first thing I want to point out is that I don't think that this bass was made straight in Serum with no additional effects. I think that the original bass was probably a sample, and it was then heavily manipulated to create that interesting texture. But we can get close just using Serum. So bear in mind that what we're recreating today is not exactly how I think it was built. It's just one way to get a pretty similar sound. Also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my recreation, which is as close as I could get it. And then I'm going to show you the basic principles behind that recreation. And we're going to create a new bass from scratch. So we're not going to land in the exact same sound exactly, because to get it exact, you're going to need to A-B back and forwards and tweak little things here and there. But I want you to understand the main concepts rather than just how to make one bass, because the concept is itself pretty interesting. And I have to also remind you that this tutorial file and a whole bunch of others are available on my Patreon. So if you're interested in just downloading these to have a play around or to see how things tick, then that's available to you as well. Let's get on with it. Okay, so here's the recreation of Skeptical's remix of Sinkhole by Mefjus, and you can see there's an atmosphere group which has a few things in it. There's a main bass and some drums. So I'll play this so you can get a feel for how close the recreation is. Okay, so I think that's reasonably close in terms of the bass texture. The atmospheres are quite different and the drums aren't, spot on, but I mainly wanted to focus on the bass because I know that's what everyone's interested in. So let's do a quick recap of everything else before we get stuck into it. So first up, we've got the atmospheres. So they're just audio samples that are dragged in. Here's what they sound like. And the interesting thing about them is that there's not much processing on each atmosphere sound, but there's plenty of delay, reverb, and then a compressor on the group. So they all get processed by that same huge, expansive delay and reverb. Here's a reverse sweep that happens. And then there's some LFO zaps that come in a bit later. And that stab at the end is really just to round out the melodic aspect of the tune. I really wanted it to end on, a hard note. So the main thing there is just plenty of delay, plenty of reverb, and a little bit of compression so that the delays and the reverb are constantly being thickened up and accentuated. It's really important for the overall flavor of something like this. If we remove those entirely, it's kind of just a bit dull to have the same sound repeating over and over. The spatial movement of the atmospheres coming back and forwards and swelling and falling down again really is what adds a lot of the interest to the background of the track. All right, let's get through these drums. And so we've got a kick and a snare and then another snare. So the kick sounds like this and the snare sounds like this. If anything, that snare's a little bit long, but it's not too long. And then there's this one, which is just a little accented snare. So the main drums all sound like this. And that's a pretty typical two-step pattern. Everything except the kick and the snare is in a percussion sidechain group. So it's got a really heavy sidechain to the kick and the snare output. So that's the hats with the sidechain. Without the sidechain, it sounds like this. So really heavy sidechain to create heaps of room. In the later half of the demo, the percussion all sounds like this. So there's some shakers. And there's some noise. And then there's those hats with one additional hat playing much faster. So I'll play it without and then with. So it sounds a little bit overbearing or something without the sidechain. With the sidechain, all of those layers are squished and kind of pulse in around the main beat. And this noise layer is kind of interesting in that it's a noise sweep from my peak. You could use any filtered noise that you have to hand with just a tiny portion of it cut out. Here's what it sounds like originally without the side chaining. But I've just taken a tiny portion of that and looped it, filtered it, and sidechained the heck out of it. There's just a little background noise, and those sorts of things are really key. Again, like the atmospheres, they kind of fill out the top end and give you a little bit of a nice spatial element inside a track like this, which is essentially pretty minimal apart from the bass. So let's get on with the bass. I'm going to first show you this recreation, and we'll step through it as methodically as we can. So let's loop up this section here. I tried to get this as close as I could to the original. It's got a lot of the same movement, if not the same harmonics. Let's have a look at the effects initially, because that's pretty easy. There's a compressor, so that's just making things louder. So we'll turn it off for now. We've got an EQ and a filter, and they're both doing essentially the same thing. The filter is set to a peaking filter, and the EQ just has a little bell peak in there. And both of those are moving around. You can see that this filter is attached to LFO2, and this bell is attached to LFO1. So there's slightly different movement, and I hope that the encoding will let you see the movement on the dials. But they're moving in completely different patterns with roughly similar timing. We're going to get to the LFOs in a little bit to get the movement right. So if we turn those off, you can hear what the sound sounds like without those. There's that syrupy low mid element has been removed because those bell sweeps are really key to accentuating some of those low mids in a not distorting kind of way. We do have a distortion. It's on very small amount. You can hear that it's creating a bit of crackle up the top. The interesting thing here is that the post EQ is on, and it's on really low. So this is essentially being a low pass filter all over again. And we're losing a lot of levels because of the distortion and the filtering. The other thing we've got here is a hyper and a dimension, which is just giving us a whole bunch of stereo, which we don't really need. But it sounds good. Okay, so that's all the effects. They're off now, so we'll go back to the main page and we'll just walk through what the elements in here are doing. So starting from the main oscillator, we have an almost square wave oscillator shape. Now this is just a sine wave on the first harmonic and the third. You can see we can recreate that shape pretty easily just by using the harmonic editor. There's nothing magical to that shape. It just is a nice clean bass. It's kind of my go-to for forming a nice low subtone. You can see we're using FM from B. We'll turn off A for now. We'll bring up the level of B. So B currently sounds like this. And I've made a whole wavetable of weird harmonics, let's call them. And the way that I've done that is I've just drawn in a couple of harmonics in the harmonic editor. You've seen me do this in other tutorials, and if you haven't, you should watch some other tutorials. But you can get kind of different textures out of just playing around with harmonics. Let's see what that sounds like. That's probably a bit high. Let's bring these down. So you're just creating different harmonics up the harmonic scale to then FM oscillator A by. So if we turn on oscillator A and we bring the level of oscillator B down, we get a slightly different timbre because we're using a slightly different waveform. We can pick one. So I'm not even going to bother getting our, oh, there we go, our wavetable back here. It doesn't matter too much. The filter is doing a lot of the heavy lifting because we're just scraping off all of the additional harmonics that the FM is creating. You can hear the movement of the FM is coming from LFO1, so it rises nice and slow and then falls suddenly. And with the filter movement itself, we get a bit of a sweep up and then down and up and down and then out. So you can hear the extra rhythm that provides. That extra wobble is really important to the core of the sound. The only other things that I've done here, I've mapped the macro knobs to some interesting knobs. So we've got the cutoff, we've got the FM amount, and we've got bump. Now I don't really remember what bump is set to. So it's set to the EQ and the second filter. So over in the effects tab. So if we turn these back on one by one, now that we've explained this panel, let's have a look at what hyper does. And distortion. Filter and EQ, and then we'll bring up the levels entirely with compressor. So you can see that bump is affecting the resonance here and the gain, so it's really accentuating how much of the bump happens. So these are important because we need some sort of progression over the track. If we're going to have just the same sound over the entire run of the song, it's going to sound really boring. And the interest in a song like this that's based on repetition really does come from things modulating over time. So that's this patch, and if you wanted to dial it in exactly like this, then here's a shot of the matrix as well. So you can hit pause on any of the other panels and figure out what the routing is, and the matrix here should help you out. Okay, so hopefully that's enough time for anyone who wants to just nail this to figure out how to do that. Let's build a sound from scratch, which uses the same principles, and it should land up in a fairly similar space. It won't necessarily be exactly the same because I've tried to get this as close as possible. So let's grab a fresh Serum. All right, so this is Serum open again. Let's init, and we'll start from scratch here, and we'll step through creating something pretty similar. So here's what it sounds like now. So not even close. First up, let's make it monophonic. And let's draw in this oscillator A. So we definitely want the sub, and I like harmonic 3. I like a little bit. See how it's still curvy? I think it's a good little oscillator there. This is what that sounds like. Cool. Let's give it a little bit of attack. Not too much. It should just swell around the kicks because it's re-triggering at the same time as the kicks in places. Yeah, why not? Maybe a little bit of decay as well, somewhere around 70 millisecond from memory. And then let's build up oscillator B. So we'll turn off oscillator A for now. Oscillator B is a sawtooth at the moment. Let's give it some harmonics. So I don't know why it draws those in. Let's get rid of them. I think possibly we just need some low harmonics and then a sprinkling of stuff up high. That should give us something interesting. Yeah, it sounds interesting to me. Let's turn the level down, turn oscillator A back on, and FM from B, and we'll bring this up just a little. That sounds interesting, but there's no movement at all at the moment. So let's build LFO1. We'll put it on the FM amount. We'll just give it a little bit. So it slowed it down then to be half a bar in length. I think that's about right. So we're just getting a little bit of like extra timbre change over time. The next thing we want to do is filter that pretty heavily. We'll go to a 24 dB filter and cut off maybe even right about there. Let's have a quick listen. All right, let's give that a little extra movement like the other patch. So LFO2 to cut off, and maybe we'll bring it down a little and then bring down the amount. And we want just a little bit of extra bounce and kind of like almost triplet timing, I guess. Let's see what that feels like. Oh, that's we've gone away from triplet timing there, but we'll see. And I think either half a bar or a bar. So we're just trying to get some interesting movement out of the filter. Oh, definitely a bar. Cool. So if we bypass that for a second. Cool. And then if we activate it. Oh, we need to put it on trigger mode. We need to put both of them on trigger mode. There we go. Cool, we're definitely getting some more movement there. There we go. So we've dialed in the filter amount and we've got a little bit of movement to it. We're going to probably need to keep tweaking this as we build up, but we're close. Let's go to FX and let's give it a little stereo. Not too much. Sounds okay. Let's distort this. Again, I'm going to use the shaper mode. So we'll use cross shaper, we'll edit A, and we'll give it just a bit of a push. So about there. I'm not too sold on the amount. Like I said, we're going to kind of refine this as we go. Let's put a compressor right at the end, see if we can get a bit more volume. Cool. And then let's put our post filter on the distortion, nice and low. Cool, there we go. And in this case, what we can do is we can use 2 bells in the EQ instead of the filter like in the other patch. And we'll just put the frequency modulation on for each LFO, and we'll kind of tweak it until we get something that's a bit interesting. So what we want is a little bit of gain from each, and they should just move in interesting ways and accentuate different parts of the low mids. I think that sounds pretty interesting. Again, without the EQ, there's kind of a dull sound. With the EQ, you get all that extra liquidness forming out of it. Cool. That's pretty much it. I mean, I don't think we need to go into too much more here. So interesting things that we can do. We could have the filter open up on this macro. We could have the FM amount be modulatable. Yeah, we could have a different wavetable position, or maybe we could actually have these gain amounts be modifiable with that bump macro from the other one. So if we were to label these macros now, this would be cutoff, this would be FM, and this would be bump. And so just to kind of cover what we did there, the basics of this patch are some FM of pretty simple amounts, but again, using strange harmonics, or I guess a weird modulator, to create a really rich tone without all the effects and filtering. It's still kind of, oh, let's leave the compressor on so the volume stays up. It's still a pretty interesting sound. Like, it sounds obviously synthetic, but at least it's tonally rich. There's a lot going on in there in terms of frequency content. And then we have our main filter, which is just cropping a lot of that content off. And we're using that main filter to create a fair bit of movement. So that's what LFO2 is doing here, just creating that extra wobble. And then we're giving it a little bit of stereo, a little bit of distortion, and some more low-pass filtering. And then we're accentuating little parts of the low mids. Let's increase the bump amount there. And then we're compressing it to keep the levels reasonably flat. So So I doubt that that's exactly the same as our other one. Let's check. It sounds a little higher. We've obviously used different FM modulators in our wavetable. We could go through and kind of like get rid of some of this upper stuff and maybe just give it a little bit in there and see if we get closer. And so you can go through here and just kind of pick different harmonics to work with. They're all going to sound slightly different. And I don't think, like I said in the intro, I don't think that's how this sound was created. I think the original was probably created out of samples and just mucking around and recording long takes and then loading little snippets of those takes into a sampler. You can hear by using higher harmonics, we're getting higher components to the sound. Anyway, that's kind of creating one from scratch using the same techniques and hopefully explaining a bit more of the context of what each step is about. Okay, that was inspired by the Skeptical remix of Sinkhole. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a thing or two about FM synthesis, and I will see you in the next one.